Um, Thank you, Hildegunde. By the way, I've been told that I have to speak very slowly so that I'll be understood. Yeah, so I'm gonna just take it easy. As Hildegunde already said, I'm a visual artist from Nigeria, and my departure point is photography mainly, but I also go beyond that. I work with, I consider myself an image maker, more than just being a photographer. So I work with video, that is film, and then I also write a lot. It's very important in my work, I'm writing. And I organize projects, like she said already. I am the founder and artistic director of Invisible Borders. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So recently, in my practice, I sort of like consider all of these things intersecting such that it becomes very difficult and cumbersome for me to choose what to present when I want to talk about my work, because I'm doing so many things. And one of the reasons is because throughout my career, I've always been, addressing or investigating or exploring borders and trying to sort of like, understand or be in the in-between spaces, like she already mentioned. So right now I live between Lagos and Berlin and in between. And we could also see that as me trying to demystify that distance. And this is what I do with my work, and that's my positioning. Everything that I do is about demystifying that distance that comes from imposed cartography, it's really a fake distance, especially between Africa and Europe, which is my own, or I would say my closest reality. And I know that it goes beyond that, of course, this question of borders. But my trajectory is mainly between Africa and Europe, and it's been going on like that for the past, well, I would say close to 15 years now. So yeah, I am going to talk about my practice, not in a really conventional way of presenting a body of work or something that is like lined up linearly. Let me also add that recently I started DJing, and it's really interesting what I'm learning from DJing. So my presentation today is going to be a bit like DJing, sort of like trying to mix things in no particular order. I hope I get it right. Yeah, so I'm going to be showing you slides. I don't know, what's that signal there? It's so like disturbing. I'm not supposed to be looking at that. It's supposed to be for you, but I feel like it's interfering with my work. So, okay, how am I doing in terms of talking slow?
Good.
Good? So you can understand me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is going to be somewhat participatory, in the sense that I'm going to be showing you images and text, mainly text, and there are poems. And I'm going to pause for you to read the poems because it's very important that you understand, these poems, and the text, also the images. My presentation is going to focus more on, discussing differences, and it's really going to draw from really anecdotes, personal experiences, and even the poems, the texts are anecdotal. So when you read them, you get a sense of how I am dealing with that conversation about difference, especially within the European space. And why this is very important for me is that I have been told as an African, well, coming into the 21st century, it became very important for Africans to become more proactive in telling their own stories, and there's a history There's a reason why. I don't want to go into that. Maybe I'll come to it eventually. But that has also been understood as to be an African is to speak to only Africans. But for me, it goes beyond that. It's really to reimagine the imposed cartography. It is really to reimagine that definition that has been, imposed on Africa. And so basically that's what my interest in talking about some realities. Most especially, it is based on looking at, I'll say, what I call the European identity. The European identity that I have come to believe that it is really based on negation. And I will come to that. 500 years of constructing modernity. And first of all, it began by constructing the border, or the confine that is Europe, that operates more like a safe haven. So imagine that the world was coming to an end and we started looking for another planet, and it is, say, Mars or somewhere. And we've seen that in movies. So at some point, somehow it became necessary to construct another planet, so to speak. And Europe was constructed in that way. Of course, beginning, I won't say beginning, but the most, one of the most important event was the journey of Christopher Columbus to Latin America. So I'm very aware that when modernity is talked about in European schools, or taught in European schools, it's always beginning 200 years ago, Renaissance, Enlightenment age. But some de-colonial thinkers take it all the way back to 500 years ago, when Christopher Columbus made that journey to Latin America. And so that border was mapped out. But for that to actually stick, for that identity to stick, there has to be a doctrine, to back it up. So the doctrine of racism began that way. So, and since then, the clergymen, the intellectuals, the Charles Darwins, were all part of constructing, that modernity that now became the identity of Europe today. But it is always based on negation, on what it negates. So today, all of that is changing. That identity of negation is giving way, to a truth. And I feel that that is right now where we are, what I call the white, or the Western hegemony plight or predicament, is that we are now struggling to figure out how to deal with all of that is now dismantling. Because like the thinker, Umberto Eco, the Italian thinker, said, Europe continues to deal with migration as if it is immigration. But what is happening actually is migration, but they continue to deal with it as if it is immigration. So you can actually put a stop or even slow down immigration. You can put policies that will make people sort of like, have the need to cross deserts and swim oceans to want to enter into Europe. But can we really stop migration? And what is happening right now is migration. So we are looking at a world that becomes more multiracial, more multi-optional, more context-specific. So, and these are the things that I want to touch on with my presentation today. Yes, so I will begin with so when I travel, I sort of like write poems, and my work has been about looking at how the body travels and how it operates as an archive, so again, this is inscribed in the idea of somehow, we say, like the flaneur. And what does it mean to be, for example, a black flaneur? Is it even possible? So my work is very much looking at that. And again, like I said, it's about conversing differences. So my poems are basically sort of like drawing from really little experiences as I travel, like the things that I'm thinking, but it's always about collapsing those distances or really investigating distances between what I've come to see as distance between preconceived notion and freshly acquired perception. And I'm going to talk about that when I talk about the Invisible Borders project. So yes, this poem I have chosen because it begins to give us a sense of how I exist through borders, how I cross, how I think as I pass through borders. So here, listen to the blind who sees with light, the singer who sings with no words, the cripple who walks by faith, the performer with no spectators, the artist whose studio is of open, interminable roads. So these borders also do not exist only just in the everyday, but it's also what is happening within the art world. So for me, I am very much interested in how to break away from that esoteric confine of the art world and see how I can speak to lives and people beyond, what we call the art world, And then oftentimes I am, or I hear people say, well, as a migrant or as a moving, or as a non-Westerner, why are you actually talking about these things all the time and making problems? Look at you, you're privileged now, you've arrived, and there's so many people like you. It means that things are changing. Just be patient. It's not going to happen at once. So it's
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but again, I've been burned by this, movement. I remember, this image that I just showed now is, I made it when after I was banned, in Germany in 2010, and I was banned for 2 years from entering Germany. And what that means is it will be difficult for you to enter Europe, at least Central and Western Europe. When one country in European Union bans you, then you're banned in all of the other countries. So it was for 2 years, and it was a struggle. And why was I banned? It was because somehow, and this was after I finished my studies in Paris, and I spent 4 to 5 years in Paris. So I decided not to continue with the residency permit. I just went back to Lagos and started coming to Europe with a visa, because I'm not so much interested in staying in Europe as I am interested in moving back and forth it. So somehow, because I was not used to taking visas for the past 4 or 5 years, I made a mistake somewhere. And when I eventually showed up in front of the judge with two passports stuck together, because they're all with stamps and everything, because I've been traveling, the judge discounted all of that. I'm like, why do I need, to really, be in Europe? You've seen that I have stamps everywhere. I travel all the time. But that was not considered at all. I was thrown into the deportation camp where I spent 3 days, but it was an eye-opener because I met other people there. I met mainly Africans, of course, who were in this sort of like limbo, And it's so isolated, that a lot of people don't know what is happening there. It's so far out, Copenhagen is like the suburb of Berlin, So I met people there. But one story that really I will never really forget, and I have written about it on my blog, is this man who was about 50 years old, and he was like having a good time in there, like being with everybody, all happy. And I was like thinking, so what's up? What's your plan? He's like, well, my lawyer is working, working on it. He's working to see if there's a way I can sort of like live here. But the truth is that I don't even want to leave. I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to leave? It's like, look, for the past 20 years I've been moving from one place to the other, hiding without papers for the past 20 years. Now, getting here, this is like a place of respite for me. I just want to rest a little bit. So I'm getting food here, I'm getting everything. So imagine that this is, and I said, but he said, okay, what is going to happen to me now? They deport me back to, I think it was from Cameroon. So they deport me back to Cameroon. What am I going to tell my family members after 20 years? So basically, he's lived this life that has been sort of like ascribed to illegality for 20 years. So it's a life in parentheses. He cannot account for it. So imagine that. So it's a life that does not exist. So he does not know how to back up the fact that for 20 years there is no legality to his life. And but he just wanted to rest. And so, I have come across stories like this, which got me thinking about, this whole, violence. Some of the images that I've put together, or this presentation even, and please read the poems because it's very important, because I can't say everything, especially since I've done the work. So some of these are the experiences that sort of inform the way I position myself as I move through the European space, with the knowledge that it was constructed and still continues to operate as a safe haven for a lot of people. And whenever a national identity in Europe is evoked, it's always, at the expense of something else. As recent as today, this morning, we were watching Trevor Noah, the comedian, responding to the French ambassador that wrote a letter to him, telling him that he was like, legitimizing the arguments of the far right by saying that the Africans the footballers who won the World Cup are Africans. And look at his response. Realize that, what he was really talking about is what, a lot of people, even this French ambassador, cannot really process, which is duality, And this is where the world is going to. So again, my poems is about that duality, And Western hegemony does not know how to enter or how to even process that duality. And this is, where we are now. And everyone is caught in this bind, as Walter Mignolo will tell you in his book, The Darker Side of Western Modernity. He talks about how everyone is caught in this colonial matrix of power. And even Toni Morrison and Gloria Veka, with her book, White Innocence, talks about this state of fixity where we are now stuck. It's no longer the predicament of the non-Westerner. Everybody is stuck in this, how do we move? It's becoming a multiracial world, but how do we move? Whiteness cannot continue to be the constant by which everything else is variable. So, yeah, let's move on. But anyway, I said I was banned in 2010, but in 2015 I was banned again. 2 years. So, which sort of like which was lifted in 2000 or sometime 2000. I eventually, took the police to court and all of that. So the point I'm trying to make, by the way, by talking about being banned is, to dispel all the whole, assumptions that, it comes easy for someone like me. I work hard for it. To enter Europe is really something that I have earned through my work, through my ideas. So the argument that, it comes easy and it's all getting better is, again, all false, and all misguided, The truth is that it's not getting better, it's getting worse. The borders are closing and closing and closing, So yes, I just want to make that point. Anyway, talking about working with body and even borders, this image was made when, during the Invisible Borders road trip in 2014, we made a road trip from Lagos to Sarajevo. And this was when we were entering Germany from France. Yes, and it was after this road trip and sometime in 2015 that I was banned again because of visa issues, I think, also. So, but I'll come to Invisible Borders later. So talking about the body, I have been investigating not just about just borders in the sense of the prosaic sense of it, which is the physicality of it. It's also within, the medium, say photography. So this body of work is called Indecisive Moment. Of course, it's a reference to Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment, which, after, history of photography and class and everything, I came to understand as, a function of Western hegemony to decide that something is one. So I started playing around with this whole idea of the indecisive. And of course, that will show up again in a recent article that I wrote two weeks ago about shapelessness. So I started working with composite. So, and the premise is that for every decisive moment, that one image, my right indecisive moment that is sandwiched in it, that is not accounted for, that is, again, negated. So that is the conceptual premise of this body of work. Again, these works are made on the go in different cities. The first one was in a small village in the south of France, this one, and then this one is in Khartoum, in Sudan. Of course, as usual, my work is always talking about elsewhere, a story of distance. So the presence of the satellite, the satellite dish, and then of course pulling it and changing direction and what the things that I'm doing. It's called being reception, that I am, again, it's a reference to the body being reception, that is being the material, or being empowered to transmit, but also receive. And then of course I continue to work that way. This work was made in Berlin in a park, in a very famous park in Berlin, Heisenheit, and of course is a somewhat a reference to some of the activities that go on in the Heisenheit Park. And again, it's because of the space. The Heisenheit Park is has this sort of underground where all the marijuana and all the weed is sold, and the police come in all the time to raid the place, and it is usually assumed that people who sell these things are non-Westerners, are non-Germans, and of course oftentimes there's all this generalization going on. So this work is referring to this opacity that happens there. It's that a bit of the agency that on one hand the agency that those people have to really remain opaque and have this other alternative or aberration to the norm, But at the same time, we're talking about anonymity and facelessness, all of that happening there. So this work is sort of like a reference to that. All right, so what you see here is, so now I'm in Berlin, and then the next image I'm in Lagos, using my body in a different way as well. So of course, the process or the story behind an image like this is also very important. So again, I like to work in the everyday, like I said, the banal, because it's a space that I think that there's a lot of material, and it is, not often addressed enough, by artists. We lock ourselves up in the studio and we experiment and blah blah blah. But when you go out, especially in African spaces, life plays out in the public space. So there's a lot of material. Sometimes it's just enough to insert yourself in it and put your frame, and that's it. The work is done, which is basically how this work was made. Is that this is already a kiosk that was standing there with this mannequin inside it. And of course, this is something that we know very well, that all the mannequins that we know are all, European mannequins. Has nothing to do with people who wear the clothes, or, who has nothing, even the physique, it's completely different. So this work was sort of like about addressing that, and this whole idea of displacement or dispossession. Yeah. One thing that is also very important in my work is looking at the linearity of time. And again, I take this from the likes of Walter Mignolo. I come back to him again as one of, he talked about time as one of the components that was colonized in the construction of modernity. So space and time was colonized. Space in the sense that Europe became the center, and then time, that in the sense that everything is now wrapped around the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment age as the beginning of modernity. So he talked about how by that space and time was colonized. So and also by that, history became linear. So in my work, I'm also looking at the non-linearity of time. And this image that was made in Abuja, in Nigeria, is very much illustrative of this, but again, there's so many things happening in this image. First of all, this is a young man that could easily pass for, or could be defined as, coming from the lumpen proletariats, the people the hawkers, the low income. So he sells these clothes coming from China. And so for me, getting him to participate in this image is also to address, the everyday person, and to bring, that figure of the everyday person into the narrative. But also there is a railway, which is very important in terms of how Nigeria, or even Africa in general, was constructed. Africa and Nigeria was really colonized through railways, and so there is that. So one, he's standing on the rails, but at the same time, there is this receding background, which for me is also part of the questions I ask. So where are we going from here? So this work is very much indicative of that, and this one even brings it even further. Some of these works I already have in the exhibition that opens tomorrow at the Salzburg Galerie. So you're welcome to see them in real life at the space there. So the same is happening here. Again, there is a figure of the everyday person selling, but again, there is a figure of the pregnant woman. And we usually say in my culture, where I come from, in my tribe, that I will just translate it right away. That tomorrow is pregnant and nobody knows what it's going to give birth to. And so, yeah, that was actually the guiding thought behind this work. That, by the way, that was my nephew in her belly. Yeah, so that's really the thought behind this work, and it says that he is moving into this future, and then there was a part of that residue of that what he's carrying that was down left in the third image. So she's there standing, and then in the second image he's moving into the future, but in the third image he's no longer there, but there's a residue of that, you know, present that he left behind. It's sort of like to create a tension between the present and the future for me. Yeah, so by now you've gotten a sense of where I'm going with my works. This is the same. Nigeria is a place that, you know, the way I describe my country is that we are so blessed and yet so cursed. You know, because we have so much resources, oil and everything. I remember growing up, and when they show us map of Nigeria, they usually show us all the, you know, natural resources on the ground, and it's just scattered everywhere, from coal to tin to copper to oil and everything. It was so rich, but you know, mismanagement and corruption and all of that, but also the involvement of the West a lot. I mean, the Netherlands, for example, you know, is probably sustained by the oil coming from Nigeria. A lot of people don't know that. So when you know, the Dutch tell me, oh, this is taxpayers' money, I say, I think we have to have a conversation about distribution of capital. You know, so because it's not really taxpayers' money, it's coming from somewhere. You know, but you know, maybe you do not have the benefit of hindsight. You do not have, you know, you don't make correlations. So you think, is there any place in the Netherlands there's oil? There's none. But the headquarters of Shell is in the Netherlands. Where's the oil coming from? It's coming from the south of Nigeria. And people have died, been killed because of that. And the Dutch government, Netherlands, have always been complicit in this. So, but again, it doesn't stop at that. You know, they connive with, you know, our leaders, and they rip off, you know, the everyday person. So this work is basically, it's called Dilemma of a New Age. Just like the other work you saw is called Dilemma of a New Age 2. This one is called Dilemma of a New Age 1, which is, again, the plight of the so-called millennials who are going to be the future of tomorrow, but really there is no future. You know, it's really bleak, let me put it that way. It's really bleak, and if we go by how the world is designed today, you know, then we'll say really there's really no hope in that sense. Yeah, maybe time for some text. I sort of like this poem because, and it's fairly recent. Yeah, so the poem you just read for me is fairly recent, and again, like you've already by now you understood, is again looking at that, you know, difference. And like I said, it's really anecdotes. You can already tell that I was standing somewhere in Potsdam, you know, making correlations between a statue of Atlas somewhere on a dome and making. But what's interesting for me is that I make all these correlations and I take it all the way back, and I get a sense of, you know, history, you know, and you know what, and I do research before I write a poem. So so again, Atlas is the symbol of the Renaissance. So, and again, I was just like drawing a line that I hope that is not imaginary. It's not imaginary at all, between, you know, that dream that European identity that's very much anchored to liberté, égalité, fraternité of the Renaissance, and this man who has been here and there and everywhere in between. And for me, I think this is really central to my work, to immediately to use figures like this to sort of like highlight the rhetoric of Western modernity, the lies that is like stuck under it. And I think that this is very much important for all of us, really. Like I said, this is not me trying to dismantle, Western identity or anything. It's just basically, to join, that movement or that idea that it is important we begin to create or other centers and other peripheries, like I said, multi-optional and other contexts as well. So yeah. So I spent last summer, so exactly this time last year, I was in a residency in Bordeaux. Bordeaux is a very important city for me in the sense that when I came to Europe the first time, it was one of the cities besides Paris that I lived in and I did work. So my work back then in 2004 was to photograph, Africans living in Bordeaux. And then 14 years later, I came back and I was able to photograph some of those families again after, this is one of them. But you see the boy standing, 18 years old now. I photographed him when he was, I think, 7 or 5, 6. No, he's 21 now, and the sister is 18. I think I photographed, he was 5 years old and he was 7 at the time. They were all little. I photographed them in the same house. I have the image. In fact, it's in my website, But I went back and I photographed these families again. And that's Bordeaux for you, in the sense that it is really a city, one city in France, like Marseille or Toulouse, or even Paris. And this is very important, because I'm going to show you something as well. This is very important. Because recently, I posted this on Facebook. So I think it's important to remind this very proactive president that Africa has always been part of France, and a city like Bordeaux is a very good example of that. So the African or Antillean community is very much ingrained as part of the fabric of the city. When you go there, you realize that they are very much present in the conversations about the city. And of course, like Salzburg, Bordeaux is also in a UNESCO World Heritage site. But it's not Sound of Music, and yeah, I watched Sound of Music for like 25 times when I was growing up. I know it by heart, I know the songs. It's not Sound of Music, it's more like, the patrimony is the dogs, and so now Bordeaux is thriving on this idea that they are UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's become really like a destination for tourists. But at the same time, they are dealing with the fact that all of that K was also a site for the transatlantic triangular slave trade and transactions. So it was Africa, Bordeaux, sometimes Nantes, sometimes Liverpool, and then United States of America, and then back. So that was a triangle back then. So it has that weight of history, and they are stuck, they don't know, they are at pains, to really articulate all of that, to talk about their patrimony in a way that it does not, in a way that its history or its colonial history does not sort of like undermine all of that. And when I was there in 2014, 2004, there was no museum for, say, slavery museum or anything. Fast forward to 2009, all the, activists, black activists and Antillean activists, made it possible that there was a room in a museum dedicated to slavery. But here is the first text that you see as you come into the museum. It's almost like apologizing and telling you, giving you a context and saying, look, whoa, Bordeaux was just, part of the time, It's not that we were really we were doing what everyone else was. In fact, Nantes and Liverpool and all these other places had, more, slaves than us. That's what you see. So there's this already, a disclaimer. Please, don't be hard on us. But what's interesting is that when you now move forward, you see a film that is a reenactment of the Middle Passage, like Amistad. I don't know how many people have seen the film Amistad. Then there's that, and everybody, you see people standing and looking at this film. And then fast forward into the other room, you see Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian who really fought. His name is Toussaint Louverture. He's from Haiti back then. I think way back. Who is today known in history as the man who really fought back and gained independence for Haiti slavery. So there is that place for him, but it was just a footnote. And then fast forward, we are already in Renaissance, and then of course the text says, and then Europeans now realized that they were actually slavery was not a good thing, and blah blah blah. And then Enlightenment age. Now we are thinking, we are forward, we are progressive. But what is discounted is actually all the acts of resistance and pushback by the slaves. It had only a footnote. Now, that brings me to how we should talk about, slavery in this time, so that it will be really relevant. Because I ask myself, if my child goes into that place, to get some history about Africa, is he going to come out there wanting to be an African? He lives in Europe. He has European friends. He's going to come back to school and behave that he never saw anything, because he doesn't want to associate with that kind of, Africa, whether it is history or not. Now, let's flip it around. A European or white child goes into that place to see that. He looks at it. He or she is disconnected from that reality. He's just looking at it like everyone. He looks at it. And then comes out and sees this billboard. So how is that productive for the conversation? These are the questions that I ask myself in my work. So, by the way, this is in Salzburg. This is Caritas with all their good intentions. And we have discussed this in the class here. We have talked about how, this way of imaging is reproducing coloniality and this mentality. It's not moving us forward. From that museum, I'm talking about slavery in that way that does not in any way account for all the... I interviewed a professor in Bordeaux from Haiti. He said to me, Emeka, let me tell you something. For every act of Sebastian, for every act of, humiliation, subjugation that came out of slavery, there's been an equal act of resistance that followed it, like the shadow follows the sun. But we don't know that. Today we talk about slavery, and it's always about humiliation. It is not relevant for any of us here, really. What we want to see is how the slaves fought back, which now led to these people thinking that it's no longer lucrative, to deal in slavery, which now led to the Enlightenment age, the so-called Enlightenment age. Because if it wasn't like that, then there wouldn't have been colonialism. If it was really out of the goodness of the heart, then colonialism wouldn't have replaced slavery. So it was like, okay, these guys are killing themselves off. I have a story, I know of a story where people from my tribe, the Igbos, held hands together like this in their chains and drowned themselves. And that's actually where I come from. We are like that. We say, they talk to each other and say, look, rather than slave for these people and work for them, we'll kill ourselves. That's our protest. Taking our life is our protest. That suicide was not just, out of depression. It was a proactive act. Very little is talked about, or is said of, events and, stories like this, but they are there. So anyway, so when you go all the way fast forward, and then let me go a little bit backwards again. Like you see this image here, it's in Bordeaux as well. So this is the miroir d'eau, so the reflecting the mirror water or something like that. It is one of the most visited tourist attraction in the world, photographed even. But what's interesting is that the buildings you see there is Place de la Bourse, which is the finance square. But what that means is that this K is actually where slavery again. So you see this this mirror here was built on top of this history. So I was interviewing an artist from Bordeaux, and he said to me, "Look, Emeka, it feels like it's like Bordeaux is like the mirror, who is the fairest of them all, this sort of like reflecting its beauty, but also hiding what is hiding. It's like the Dorian Gray, So you are hiding all of that history, and then you are throwing back that beautiful image of Bordeaux. And in class, we were reading about the correlation between terrorism and tourism. And so you have tourists coming, and then they dance, and then you see that reproduction of merchandise of bodies again. So I just wanted to touch on that. Well, on that note, because I think my time, let me talk about invisible borders. Like I said, this is DJing. I hope you're dancing. So Invisible Borders is a project that I founded in 2009 in collaboration with other Nigerian photographers. It began as a photographic project, and of course I was fresh out of the Fine Art School in Paris, and already I was thinking that it is important we begin to address borders and begin to reimagine this cartography. So I said the best thing to do is to really, instead of to fly over Africa, which we always do, So one thing you notice about if you're an African is that, there's this void when you move from one place to the other. So you are teleporting basically, not under. It's just like you fly over and you fly back in. It feels very strange sometimes to fly that way in and out, especially if you fly Air France, for example, you take off, it's always the same. It's always been the same. 11 o'clock at night in Lagos, and then you land 6 a.m. in the morning in Paris, and oftentimes you are sleeping. So it's like you just look up there in Paris, nothing happened. Distance not accounted for, you know. So we thought it'd be interesting to travel by road, but also for us to understand the continent, because we keep saying Africa is not a country. Africa is not a country, but we say to ourselves, we need to understand, you know, how far it goes and how far it is. So since then, we started to articulate. So with photographers, writers, filmmakers, it began slowly. With photographers first, a little bit, one writer, and then also we doubling as filmmakers. Then to the second edition, 2010, third edition, where we travel from Lagos to Dakar, and then third edition from Lagos to Addis Ababa. The fourth one, Lagos to Libreville, and you can find a documentary film by Al Jazeera of the project. So please, and you really enjoy it. I wish I could play just an excerpt for you, but really you enjoy, you know, seeing the project and how we exist in the project. But in 2014, like I already mentioned, we traveled from Lagos to Sarajevo. At that time, people now asked us, but why do you want to travel now? Why do you want to leave Africa? And some of our funders, in fact, it was very difficult for us to raise money from our European partners, because they thought, oh, Africa is more interesting for us, you know, traveling in Africa. I said, but traveling to Europe is to, you know, address a centuries-long relationship between Africa and Europe, but also to underscore the fact that Africa has always had relationship with Europe. And so our traveling to Europe is actually traveling to Africa also. Okay, I'm sounding like Trevor Noah now, but you understand my point. But again, it's to really, like I said before, demystify that distance. To say that there are other ways to travel from Africa to Europe that is possible, other than dying at the desert or drowning in the sea. And of course, we drove our van all the way into Europe from Africa. And when we drove in, it was strange for a lot of people because it had a different plate number, one they have never seen before. It is almost impossible for that kind of plate number to show up there. Imagine that plate number showing up in Berlin. The police will come, they don't know where to send the tickets. So we're having a field day, like, oh, park it there. Where are they going to send the ticket? There's no address. It's so far. It's completely outside what they understand. And let me talk about this a little bit. The moral concept of the impossible. No, let me not do that. Let me finish with invisible borders. Okay, so, but most importantly for us is, you know, this project has allowed us to enter, you know, that border condition, but in a very, very physical way, where our body, you know, and presence is used in the negotiation of those borders, in transcending those borders. So it's not like, and of course this leads me to this poster, which is the poster for our next road trip that begins this August. So mainly I'm done here. I'm back in Lagos to make this road trip from Lagos to Maputo, which is about 11,500 kilometers by road, passing through, you know, like it's almost an impossible journey. Well, I don't want to talk about that, you know. But what's interesting is you notice that there's, you know, the text there that looks like it was just found, it was just on the wall, you know, as part of the image, but it's not, you know. In fact, we displaced an image there. Our designer sort of like put in a text there that is, I am where I think. And of course, it is Walter Mignolo again who proposed this expression as a decolonial option. And of course, it is in relation to, Tia, help me again, Derrida, or what was it? Descartes, yeah. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. So what he's basically proposing here is this multi-optional. You think from where you are. So there is this context specific, you know, And for us, we think that this is really the decolonial option, that, you know, the world has to be more multiracial, more multi-optional, and more context-specific, you know. So, and of course, it is translated into 4 languages: English, Portuguese, French, and Swahili. And these are the languages we'll be working with during the road trip. So that's it basically. Now, where do we go from here? I think I don't want to spend so much time, because the moral concept of the impossible, this expression was first used by John Berger when he was talking about the work of an artist I don't remember the name of the artist. In his book about looking, he talks about the moral concept of the impossible. But for me, the way I use it, or the way I adopt it in my work, is to talk about the possibilities that's been made, you know, impossible by, again, Western hegemony, that way of structuring. So how do we regain our moral concept of the impossible? That is to say, how do we attain the impossible self? The impossible self. Now, logic of emotion. You know, oftentimes when we discuss difference, before we get past, you know, like 1 minute of conversation, we are stuck in labels, you know, stereotypical labels, politicized labels. He is Romanian, she is this, that. And before we get to the human emotion or the human story, you know, and then it never happens, because, you know, it's all stuck in this, you know, very sometimes abstract to our reality, you know, labels. So my proposal is to find a place for the logic of emotion, you know. And of course that means that with that, everyone has a personal history, and we should allow a space for that to thrive. Epistemic disobedience. Okay, I'm almost done. This is the last. Okay, so that's for logic of emotion. Epistemic disobedience is a term that, again, was invoked by Walter Mignolo in his book, The Darker Side of Western Modernity. He talks about the need, you know, to create a space for aberration, not necessarily to dismantle Western hegemony, like I said. I don't think that is the aim. The aim is to actually go back and reclaim all of these things, all of these stories, all of these histories that have been negated. Not to go back in the sense of really go back to the past, but dig them up and, you know, bring them to the center, into that multiracial, you know, center, into that multi-optional center. Or even, you know, in all these centers and peripheries. So epistemic disobedience is to have, you know, benefit of hindsight, is to go all the way back 500 years and maybe even more, you know, to think of, you know, how all of this has been constructed. In fact, there's I think Achille Mbembe, in his book, The Critique of Black Reason, talks about what blackness is now. That blackness is no longer a subcategory or a sub of whiteness, that it is an understanding of how modernity was constructed. But I also want to talk about Nina Simon, who in her concert sometime in the 1960 something, where she performed Black Girl I'm Proud. But before she performed, she said to the audience, which had, you know, white people as well as blacks, she said, although this song does not put you down, it simply ignores you, because there is something I want to speak to. But I think that for me this is very important. He is not talking to white people in that sense. She's talking to Western hegemony, Euro-American hegemony, He says, although it does not put you down, which is, it is not looking to dismantle you, it simply ignores you because there is a bigger picture. There is something to be done about the restitution of the world, the repairing of these cartographies. It is a much bigger picture for which all of us should be involved, implicated. So that's it about epistemic disobedience. There's thinking as remembering. I won't spend so much time on that. Basically, it's simple. And I think that it's more, with the millennials and, the Generation X and all of that. It's important to understand that history is not repeating itself. It's just not done with us yet. So we are still caught in that historical time loop. So when I hear young people say, we want to move on, I say, to what? You are still wrapped in that coloniality. But the thing is that you do not understand because you are not looking backwards and see how long this was constructed and how we got here. But yet you want to move on, you want to move on. I want to move on like you. We want to all abandon this. Africans are tired of the Africa burden. They just want to move on. The young ones don't know because, our forefathers, betrayed us with all the independence, nothing came out of it. So they just want to move on. But I say, move on to what? How can you move on when you have not addressed, if you do not deal with history, you will always be, be conditioned by it. So that is it as thinking as remembering. Thinking as introspection. Now, this is, I think, for all of us here. Oftentimes, I'm being invited to come and present. And, I begin to say that, or to think that the West is a place where knowledge is consumed like entertainment. There's a privilege to be here today, to listen to all of this, and then go home and say, wow, it was a good evening, and then carry on with life. But in other places, where they don't have this privilege, you bring this to them. And we've seen this on the road trip. We go to places, we talk to people, and you see them coming back 5 years later and say, it was that conference that changed everything for me. They take it, they run with it because they don't have the privilege. But I say the highest form of, abusing privilege is to treat knowledge as entertainment. So we must allow these things to enter, and we must ask ourselves questions from within. Whiteness always takes the neutral. When difference is discussed, it's always about the other people. It can no longer be that way anymore. Everybody must enter that space, that multiracial, multi-optional, context-specific world. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emeka. It was a very good talk. Thank you. You have now all the possibility to ask questions. Perhaps I'll start with one. There was one point in your speech where you said there is no future. You were talking about the political systems in Africa, and you repeated it even. What exactly did you mean? No future for what? In general? Because I had the impression that you're very optimistic in a way when you say what should be done, and it's not that you think it's not possible to be done.
Well, I am very optimistic, but my optimism is based on the constant realization of the work that needs to be done. So it is not a dreamy one. So So I wake up and I talk about let's go and everything, but you realize that, you know, as I am in the art world and speaking oftentimes to the same people, is an echo chamber. Outside it, a lot of other things are happening, you know. So I think if I remember correctly, I didn't immediately say there's no future. I said if we are going this way, if it continues to go this way, then there won't be any future. Of course, that's what I really mean, you know. But again, I think that things can change. But I think the best way to put it is that things are changing, really. A lot of people are doing things now, but again, the more things change, the more things remain the same. That's where we are. So all of this is to say that there's a lot of work to be done, but it's important to recognize that if we are not proactive about it, if we do not understand that what we are dealing with here is reimagining the world as we know it, really reimagining the world, because it's no longer sustainable, you know. Not for Westerners, not for non-Westerners, it's no longer sustainable this way, you know. Then, of course, we are still going to be here. Yeah.
And the second question, the Caritas photograph, yeah?
Yeah, should I show it?
You can show it,
okay,
yeah.
okay. I like to show it.
There is, yeah. I mean, do you think within the concept of Caritas there could be done other photographs which could be acceptable from you, or is it more or less the concept of Caritas that makes these pictures which are unacceptable, because it's about this, the West helping Africa?
Yeah, I think first of all that, you know, for example, there are artists here, you know, from my class, you know, we're doing serious talk, you know. I think they should, you know, employ some of them, you know, because if they are really interested in telling their story and reaching people, then they can actually reimagine these images. It's very simple. Walter Benjamin talks about how you can, John Berger talks about how you can bring better understanding to images, you know, put context to them, use text, you know, do something better than that. You can do more. There are other ways, you know, there are artists that really can, but no, that's not the aim. If you look at how these images operate and how they are positioned, they are always strategic. You know, it is meant to actually exploit the emotions of people, you know. And of course, this whole Caritas and all the good intention, let's not forget that behind all of that, there is an economy of aid, and it has to be sustained. So they don't have any interest in really, you know, reimagining the way they portray, because they believe that when they show these images, that people are moved to give money. But what happens on the side is that is also how people look at every child that is black, or every person that is black that is passing by. So you are conditioning the people to think that this is the only thing there is about black people. And we cannot continue to do this. This is really like sustaining the economy of aid, because they really need to sustain that. You know,
Yeah, there are. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I agree. But there are better and worse organizations. In this aid economy, there are better and there are worse organizations.
Like in everything, yes.
Yeah, you're right. Other questions?
So I want to go back to the beginning of your talk, where you have been speaking about migration is not the same as immigration. We can't continue to say immigration because migration cannot be stopped. Migration means movement. And for me, movement means also that it's not only the body that is moving, it is also our ideas, our culture. So you have mentioned also, you have mentioned also this guy, I forgot his name, who was congratulating the French team as an African team to have won the World Cup, and the ambassador of France, he reacted by saying that these guys are French. And I'm asking actually this question as a child of the diaspora, that isn't it possible somehow to be both, to be African and French, to keep the culture, but at the same time learn the new culture? Do we always have, does integration always mean that we have to take all the new thing but forget where we come from?
Of course, in post-colonial conversations from W.E.B. Du Bois to Paul Gilroy, to Miyakuto, all these thinkers, Frantz Fanon, everybody, has done work on the whole idea of the double consciousness, and so like owning that schizophrenia, but it's also a conversation about duality. And like I said before, this is really possible. This is what the times are calling for. But it is a threat, like I said, it is a threat to that identity of negation that Europe was built on, that knows only one. So this man, this French ambassador, thought he was really doing something bad, but he was reproducing hegemony. So he couldn't even process the duality that someone like Trevor Noah not only was discussing, but also is part of. So that is the thing. So, but what's interesting for me is that now there's someone like Trevor Noah who also has a platform. He can't be stopped. He can't be stopped. He has a platform where he can respond to the French ambassador. And I think that this is the first time where, the non-Westerner or the marginalized or the otherized, will have such a platform to actually, make that into a conversation. I think that is something, there's something really you can hold on to from that, as in a way of optimism. That now, we can now hear from his own side. The whole idea of modernity was constructed because, people who constructed it always had the agency to do that. That was how it was constructed. That was how it stuck because, all the, explorers who went to Africa, they were the rock stars of their time. They were the Hollywood stars of their time. The likes of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the rest of them who wrote about Africa, some of them didn't go to Africa. They took materials from those explorers who went to Africa, and then they imagined and wrote about Africa from that distance, And if you look at, again, I come back to Achille Mbembe, he talks about going forward, we have to return to knowing and knowing intimately. And of course, it means that you cannot sit somewhere and assume. You must go. I am where I think. I am where I think. And by that movement, there's also duality. So, and I believe, yes, of course, but we all have to get used to that. Western hegemony has to accept that it's even possible to be this and be that at the same time. Yes.
I just read this book by an African American, I don't remember the name. It is called The Letter to My Son, and it's an African American.
Yes, it's a Chinese quote.
Yeah, and he always writes those who think they are white.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and this I found very interesting. Yeah, because it's the reality,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns it the other way around.
Yeah, definitely.
Other questions?
She was going to ask. She is
Oh, sorry. You're the next.
Okay, no, she isn't.
So you have kept on repeating John Berger as a reference, and John Berger,
Mm-hmm.
or John Berger, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, he was writing this book, The Seventh Man, where he's describing the experience of the migrant, the experience of the Turkish man coming to a country like Germany in the 70s. John Berger is also saying that in this book that these kind of guest workers, so-called West workers, that this was also a form of neo-colonialism. So you now in your presentation are also speaking that colonialism still continues. And I would like to know from you, in what forms does this still happen?
Well, I think that, first of all, it is really colonialism and, of course, racism is very much inscribed I think it's in the form of institutional now. It has moved away slightly from everyone slightly being polite. It's only recently now that the conversation is coming to the fore now and everybody's sort of like aware of it, but it has really gone to take a place in institution and institutional discrimination. For example, even the computers are even programmed now to be racists, in nature. So, for example, I tried to open a bank account the other day, and they say it's for everyone. I put in my details and say, they say 5 minutes open. But of course, when I got to nationality and I put a different nationality and I got to the end, I was kicked out. I called, I say, why am I kicked out? I'm opening an account. Oh, sorry, we don't know. Of course, there's nobody, sitting at the other end. It's a computer that recognizes that, I'm not German, and my name maybe is not, well, let's forget the name, but nationality, So, and there is no way to really vet, it's a computer, what kind of Nigerian am I, or, So, I've had experiences like that, and many people always have experience. You cannot, you have all these online platforms that they said, you can buy things or you can do all these things that you can do from your home, but it's not meant for everybody. Again, yeah, that has a history in, of course, how European Union, as an organization, as an institution, in fact, it played an important role in the construction of, the borders as we know it today. European Union, for me, began with the scramble of Africa, really. It's very scramble of Africa in 1885, the Berlin Conference, when European countries came together and decided and shared Africa into. But of course, there are other places. It's not only Africa. There's India, but it began really the institution itself, and since then, it's been an institution of creating borders for exploiting and keeping basically otherizing, So, but today you see what is happening. There's a bit of confusion and yeah. So there are many ways, but it's not only in Europe. Also, there's neo-colonialism that Kwame Nkrumah, warned against or off. In Africa, it's happening. But I think that it is really sustained by the relationship or dynamics between capitalism and human relationships. So the world continues to place human relationship at the service of capital instead of the other way around. Meanwhile, the capital is supposed to be at the service of human relationship. So I think that has to somehow be reversed. That's very utopic, but of course, again, a lot today. So much so that there is no real left in that sense anymore, because they've become progressive in that sense. And what that means is really that corporate power. They've subscribed to the law of corporate power and market speculation and all of that. So and that is why you have, all this movement to the far right and someone like Donald Trump. Yeah.
Thank you. I may take this a bit out of context from you've been talking a lot about Europe and Africa, but I'm going to make a different reference from the question. Looking at a country like America, for instance, of recent there was this thing that happened for the first time where a black man is the mayor of a county in Montana, and Montana is completely, is about 98% white people in America because it's in the northwestern part of it. And then, people were asked why they would vote for a black man in an all-white state, a Trump state, if you'd say. And they were talking about how they were looking beyond his skin color and looking at the abilities he had over the other white candidates. But then in the same America, you still suffer racism against black people in another part, where there's police brutality and black men are being shot for no reason, and then even African immigrants come to the airport, or migrants, however it may be, and you land at the airport, they look at you, look at your passport, and be like, oh no, you have to go back to Africa because we don't want you here. You've been to a bunch of places, or you're from this, or for no reason exactly. So there's that. America is a country of enlightenment, you can say, because they're technologically advanced, science and education and all sorts. But then both sides of blackness still exist. So when you talk about there being no future...
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean by both sides of black... Okay, yeah.
Yeah, both sides of blackness exist because, people like Trevor Noah, for instance, holds a place where, you really wouldn't see that. He's the host of the big show that's watched by loads of people all around the world, especially white people. So when you say that there's no future necessarily, like hypothetically, and would you say that this generation would have to pass on before a chance comes for some more progress? Looking at the racial diversity in the world, whether it's in the New World or in the New Africa or whatnot.
When I say there's no future, of course, I think I've put that in context. Actually, I've said that already. That if things continue to go the way they are, but again, you've mentioned this black mayor. And I think that, of course, you know this, that he is the exception and not the rule. So we can have him, we can have the likes of Trevor Noah, we can have, but again, we even had Barack Obama, So I think that even me, being here today and talking about this is also part of that. But maybe what I'm really getting at is, how important it is to be more deliberate, and proactive. It can be, like I said already, the younger generation is like, we're moving into the future. I don't think that mayor is not millennial, So he's not from that generation. But again, for me, it's really about recognizing the importance of being more deliberate, more proactive. If we say we're moving into the future, what future are we creating? What future and what tools, and how are we doing it? I wish I could read out something, but someone like Frantz Fanon, has talked about how if we're going to get this right, we cannot use the same precepts, you know, that was sort of like constructed and articulated by, you know, Western hegemony to go about it. We can borrow from it to create other things, you know, hybrid and all of that. And I think that is what I'm talking about, this proactivity. There's something that Mayer must have done that is extraordinary. And I tell you, he earned his place. He must have wowed people, you know, to have been voted. He must have really like gone over the roof to earn that place. You understand? So it is not something he woke up, you know, he really understood what he needs to do to earn that place. And this is basically what I'm talking about, you know, yeah. Do you have another, it looks like you have.
I mean, comparing it to the situation that happened in France recently, the black man that climbed the building to save the baby. I mean, if the baby died, it wouldn't have been the situation we know right now, giving him the French citizenship and whatnot. It would have been, oh, the African man, the baby died while the African man was trying to save her, or, you know, he contributed to it or something like that.
Yeah.
He was being human. He doesn't care about race. He doesn't care about, you know, putting his life in danger as such. That was just a natural human emotion to save someone.
Yeah, you know, but again, of course, you know that, you know, there are so many of, you know, Mohammed Gassama everywhere that is not. We are talking about him now, or the mayor, because they have they have sort of like, you know, demonstrated, you know, that they are exceptional, and that exceptionality is inscribed, was given to them, was bestowed upon them. It is the age of acrobatic belonging. You know, it's Arjun, what was it, Arjun Aparudia, yeah, that's him, you know, using that expression. The age of acrobatic belonging, you know. So let me say the way Trevor Noah said it. So Trevor Noah said, so when he was down, he was African. Now when he climbed 4 stairs and caught the baby, he became French. Now if he left the baby, he becomes an African who left the baby. So you understand that there are a lot of Mohammed Gassama that we don't know. And I agree. But who is articulating? Who is bestowing? Who is giving? Who is making people legal and illegal? That is the question. So he's now French, and nobody's now talking about the fact that he probably crossed the desert to come to Europe. He has arrived. Now, we are talking about, again, acrobatic belonging. They just won the World Cup. Now they are French. Imagine that they lost. What do you think the conversation will be about? And that, for me, is what I'm talking about. What you are trying to hint at has always been there. There's always been exceptional people. That's the whole point. Exceptional blacks doing things, but who is articulating? Who is giving agency to these things? Who is deciding what is legal and what is illegal? So, you know, I think that, you know, Mohammed Gassama and the French citizenship was a political stunt, you know, but, you know, it was just like a performance for his political whatever. So yeah.
Thank you.
Do you think we should stop here, perhaps? I think.
Well, if they're done with the, you know.
Or you want? We could. I mean, you could continue the conversation with the beer, perhaps.
That would be great.
How about that?
So thank you very much.
And